All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to ITRA Trail Talks, the official podcast of the International Trail Running Association. I'm your host, Jeff Campbell, and I'm here today to have some really interesting guests to talk about an important topic in our sport. So we're talking about women in ultra running today, and I'm lucky to be joined by two of the toughest ladies out there. So first off, I'd like to say hello to our guest, originally from New Zealand, although she's represented Team GB internationally. She's supremely accomplished with more top 10 results than I can name at some of the biggest races in the world. Sophie Grant, welcome to Trail Talks.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And then sharing the screen with us, we have from Canada a human rights lawyer, NGO founder, and one of the toughest ultra distance athletes I've ever met. We have Stephanie Case. Hey, Steph, how are you doing?
Hey Jeff, I think let's see if our Canadian accents get stronger as this podcast goes on.
Yeah. We'll send a copy to the CBC afterwards so that they could throw it on their website. So I'm well aware of both of your sort of running backgrounds, but maybe if you wouldn't mind, Sophie, just sharing a quick bio sort of yourself, your history in the sport, and sort of what you're up to in terms of your running these days.
Yeah, of course. I started ultra running back in 2013 when my husband bought me a place in the Marathon des Sables as a birthday present. And so that kind of started the whole shebang.
It's
And
a nice
since then,
starter race.
yeah, exactly. I was very lucky. He built me a heat chamber in the garage, so I was able to train in London in 40-degree heat in Fulham. But that kind of started the whole love of going long, and since then I've just tried to find races that are, interesting and different, and particularly I really enjoy racing in, races that have competitive women's fields. Like I really enjoy racing with other good women. So, I've raced the UTMB a number of times. TDS, just recently last year because of Steph's influence. So yeah, I I just love being out there in the environment and getting to go and race good women in interesting places.
Okay. And what sort of distances do you prefer to compete in? I know that you've run some very long distances, but what's sort of your range in terms of the trail running?
You know what? I'll do a bit of anything. I mean, I'm not necessarily competitive in everything, but I certainly will race anything from VKs to, what's the tour, 330 kilometers. I think probably the distances that I'm more competitive at are the 100-kilometer to 100-mile kind of range. Although, let's see, I might go back and have another go at the tour, so maybe that will be my new distance.
That sounds great. Steph, maybe you could tell a little bit about your sort of your background and your sort of involvement in the sport of trail running, both as a participant and in terms of some of the other things that you've done.
Sure, thanks. So I've been ultra running for about 15 years, and I'd say unlike Sophie, who I really see as a such a versatile athlete, I will contradict what she said. I've seen her podium at all sorts of distances of races, so I won't let her be humble on that. Yeah, in contrast to Sophie, I really can only do one thing, and that's run the really stupidly long, crazy distances well. And whereas Sophie, is very good at those races that are super competitive for women, I tend to pick these races where we don't really see much women at all, which is maybe why I tend to do well, because the field is certainly smaller. But I specialize in the kind of 200-mile plus distances. I started off in the multi-day stage racing, racing the Planet Before Desert series. got into the 100-mile distance right after that. And while I will do races that are under 100 miles for training purposes, I'm only competitive beyond the 100-mile distance, I think. And I really just love getting out in the mountains and trying to pick new running challenges, whether it's the Barkley or Tour de Glacier, which is the 450-kilometer upgrade on Tour de Géant, where you have to navigate for yourself. Whatever the challenge, I like to see how much further I can push the body and push the mind. And I think that relates to some of the training environments that I've been in. So as a human rights lawyer, I work for the UN and have been training for a lot of these crazy races in pretty difficult parts of the world, including South Sudan, Gaza, Afghanistan. I'm currently living in the Middle East. And while my base is in, I wouldn't say a calm place. I'm in Jerusalem. I also travel to Gaza, Lebanon, should be covering Syria as well. So it adds a different element, I think, to what I bring to the trails when I do get to somewhere that's quite peaceful. And then I guess outside of the running, but still in the space, I've tried to raise some issues around women's rights, the barriers that women face to entry in our sport. I think there's this understanding that all you need to do is put on your shoes and run, and it's open to everyone, and that certainly isn't the case. So I've been on the North Face's advisory council for their Explore Fund for EMEA. So this is Jimmy Chin was on the one in the US, or maybe a little bit less high profile in Europe, and then served on the equity committee for the board for Hard Rock.
No, that's great stuff. And Steph's also been involved in some organizations like Free to Run, which do you want to just say a little bit about that? Because I think that is relevant for the topic of women getting into the sport.
Yeah, thanks. Sometimes when something is so close to your DNA, you forget to mention it. So I started a nonprofit organization called Free to Run in 2014. I started it in Afghanistan. We are now, our flagship is in Iraq because of some of the difficulties we faced in Afghanistan last year with the Taliban taking over 2 years ago now, Taliban taking over the country. But it's an organization that creates and supports women and girls in areas of conflict through leadership and outdoor adventure. So really finding ways to allow women to safely and boldly engage in the outdoors and reclaim that public space that women just have less access to. And this is certainly the case in areas where Sophie and I train, but it is so much more pronounced in the areas of conflict where women are disproportionately negatively affected.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Steph. And you mentioned that a lot of people think that trail running is just one of the most accessible sports. You just need a pair of shoes. And that's obviously not the case for all athletes. It can be intimidating. There could be all sorts of other sort of barriers or impediments to even starting participation. Sophie, would you want to share? You mentioned you got started at a fairly large race because someone bought you an entry and encouraged you to start. Early on in your experiences in the sport, did you experience personally any sort of barriers just in terms of getting involved?
You know what, I've been very, very lucky that I have a husband that supports me 100% in any endeavor that I go out to do. But, even just the conversations that you have with the general public. I was a hairdresser at the time. I'm now a running coach. But I was a hairdresser at the time and having conversations in the salon with people about, even just some of the comments you get. You don't look like a runner. Or, what's your marathon time? You tell them, you don't look like you could run that fast. Just these often comments on your appearance in races. Just I don't know what it is about me, but I seem to attract people wanting to comment, wanting to block me, wanting to, do all sorts of kind of things to stop me from moving forward. And it certainly was worse, in the beginning, because I wasn't sure of myself as a runner. So you're running along and a man's telling you that you've started too fast, or you don't know what you're doing. And as as someone who it's already taken a huge amount of courage to step up to that start line, to have someone kind of belittle you like that and take that away, and you're doing it wrong, even though we are all on our own journey to get to the finish line. Be that maybe I did start too fast, but that is my cross to bear, and it's my I need to figure that out myself. I don't need to be told that by a total stranger. So there was a lot of that. And, I would love to say that it is no longer happening, but even in the last race that I ran, I had a man, I was running with another guy. We came up to a man. He let the guy in front of me pass. When I asked to pass, he said no. Yeah,
No
he said
way.
no. It was so disappointing. I was currently running in second woman. And you know what the thing is with that guy? We're not even in the same race. I am not racing you, and he wouldn't let me pass. And eventually he was blocking me on all the corners. And eventually I managed to kind of shimmy down beside him.
But the problem is it's that assumption that you're not going to be able to keep up the pace, and that's why he didn't let you go. I mean, I've certainly felt people blocking me because of that, but to explicitly say it is intense. I bet that made you run faster.
I was furious. I was so angry, and so was the guy that I'd been running with. When I caught back up to him, dropped the guy who wouldn't let me pass, caught back up to the guy I was running with, told him, and he was like, "I'm so sorry that this is that happened to you." But it's not an unusual situation, and this is I've been in the sport for over a decade.
No, I mean, that's it's a really sort of informative story. You mentioned that it was worse earlier on. Is that because you have learned to deal with sort of the adversities, or do you feel like the community has gotten somewhat better from the time that you started?
I think it is definitely starting to get better. I think probably um, and I don't speak often I don't speak the language of the races that I'm running in, so sometimes it is just off body language and stuff like that. But I've noticed over the last few years that the majority of men in races now are becoming more supportive. They are not seeing women as so much of a threat to their own personal performance, because I think before, and still I'm sure, that whole getting checked thing was and still I'm sure weighs on men that a woman may be faster than them. But I think we're seeing a lot more now. We're seeing people out there who are outright winning races. It just frustrates me, because it shouldn't have to come to that. We shouldn't have to have people like Courtney, winning races for it to be okay for a woman to be faster than a man.
So, Steph, Sophie mentioned that she had sort of some support straight away with her first race. Was that your experience? And also, in terms of other women that you've worked with in terms of running, could you talk about sort of some of the experiences that you've seen them have in terms of just getting to the start line for their first race?
I think for me personally, I have a very supportive network. But even with my own family, when I entered my first race, it was a 250K self-supported foot race in Vietnam. And my family said, "Oh, if you have to drop out, it'll be okay." And it was a supportive statement, but it was this kind of understanding. I just don't know if men, when they go off to races, are told the same thing, because we're just socialized. It's deeply embedded still in our psyche that these really tough, hard races it's a male domain. and that somehow women aren't necessarily up to the standard. I think I've been lucky in the opportunities that I've had. Where I have faced pushback, I think, is when I try to bring up some of these issues around equality, or I try to bring up some of the barriers that other women have been facing in our sport. So, for example, I had a friend reach out years ago who had gotten pregnant, and she really wanted to get a deferral of her races to another year because she was in Laboredo and another major race. And she had asked the different race directors if she could push her race entry to the next year. And some of the races said yes, and some of them said no, even though they offered race deferrals for injuries. And it was just this understanding that, I spoke to some of the race directors, and this understanding that, this is our role. We should be happy if we have babies. And, why would we worry about such a little thing like a race if you're taking on this big important role that women have. And it was just such a stark lack of understanding about what we have to face on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis as athletes. For myself, I had a miscarriage last year, and trying to come back into running and think about my race plans and my training plan for this year was almost impossible. And it's not a space I had really entered before, but I know, some of my friends have. They're doing it privately. They're doing it in secret. We don't always know what everyone is trying to do, and men don't have to think about that. They might have to think about, okay, if I'm having a kid, the baby's going to be born this week, so I should probably try to block out a few weeks around that where I don't run any races. Whereas for women, this is not just a 9-month thing, it's a multi-year thing that affects our ability to enter races, to train, to qualify for races that then we have to get in lotteries for, year after year after year in order to keep our lottery spot. I mean, it's just impossible. And it's not just the biological issues that affect our barriers to entry. I think it's also considerations around challenges for training in terms of feelings of safety. I often get pushback on this point, and so I've written down some statistics because I think having an evidence base is the best way to approach this. I recently read this brilliant book. It's called Invisible Women: Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criado Paris, and it's absolutely brilliant. And you look at that when I talk about safety in running. People think I'm crazy, but it does impact the training space. If women don't feel comfortable training in cities or training in the mountains at night, then your training time is severely reduced. Then you are forced to either train on a treadmill at home. You're forced maybe not to train in certain spaces. And looking at the statistics in the UK, for example, 62% of women are scared walking in car parks. 60% are scared waiting on train platforms. 49% are scared waiting at a bus stop. 59% are scared walking home. And for men, the statistics are much lower. They're about half of those percentages. And then if you think about women of color who are statistically more likely to live in areas with high crime rates, it's a lot worse. We talk about harassment, street harassment, which is just really never reported. 90% of women who experience unwanted sexual behavior don't report it, but when they do studies on how many women have actually experienced sexual assault, 90% of French women, for example, have been victims of sexual harassment on public transport, according to a 2016 study. So, you look at our ability to train, our ability to repeatedly qualify for races, our ability to repeatedly enter in races, to plan ahead by a year or 2 years. And then you think on top of that about all of the extra unpaid labor, the unpaid work that women still continue to do. We still, according to the IMF, women do 3 times the amount of unpaid care work as men do. And that's 2 times the childcare and 4 times the housework. And so when you put that down into hours, women spend 3 to 6 more hours a day on unpaid work compared to 30 minutes to 2 hours for men. And before people say, oh, this doesn't apply to, developed countries or, to women who have high-powered jobs, they found that that absolutely isn't true. Even when you have the woman who is a breadwinner, the one who's bringing in the cash, she's still doing more of the unpaid labor as the men. So you put all of these barriers to entry together, and that's where I'll say, no, I haven't personally suffered any, feel like I've suffered any major issues. But when I bring up these more invisible barriers, invisible to some, I've received pretty severe, I don't want to say hate, but vitriol from some members of the community, both men and women. And this came up recently when I was trying to make a push on hard rock. And then I'll stop my diatribe, but it's a topic I'm passionate about. Hard rock, I was on their diversity committee, as I was mentioning, and one of the policies they pushed through, Hard Rock 100, this is known as being one of the most closed races, I think, that because of the way their lottery system has been set up, it tends to reinforce what's seen as the old boys club. And so what they'd looked at is, because of the way the lottery was set up, the percentage of women that were applying to get into the race didn't even meet the percentage of women that actually got into the race. And so the change in policy said that basically at least the same percentage of women that applied could get in. And so what I did is I encouraged all women who had qualified for the race just to enter, because it would increase the opportunities for other women to actually get a spot, and because we tend to need, men tend to be a little bit more confident, and this is generalizing, but that there are the statistics to back it up. Even when they know that they might not be able to take something on, they enter anyway. This is the same with job applications or race entries. And women don't tend to do that. And if you don't get on the hard rock ladder, 10 years before you actually want to do the race, you won't get in. And some women had raised the fact that if they did get in and they weren't able to do the race, they'd have to pay a 200, they'd have to pay half of the race entry, which is about $200. And so I offered to refund anyone who got in the $200 if they weren't able to run the race. And the backlash that I got from some of the community, I was manipulative, I was disingenuous, I was a narcissist. That's where I've received the biggest the biggest issues. So it's not me personally, but it's the personal pushback I receive when I talk about these issues publicly.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Just gonna add this in here, Steph. I think you'll really enjoy this one. So we entered in a Schema Race last year or the year before, and we were looking at the cancellation policies if there was, a pregnancy one. You could not get a refund or deferral if you were pregnant. However, if you had a business meeting, you could.
No, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't.
Yeah. I mean, it's fairly easy to schedule a business meeting, I guess. But that's not the point. Yeah, that's wild. There were a few things that you mentioned, Steph, which which registered to me. The safety thing. I remember when a female running friend mentioned that to me in terms of safety while training, and it was one of those moments where just it hadn't occurred to me that sort of going out at night for a run would be an issue, and just a real sort of, oh yeah, wow, that's, I guess for everyone that's not necessarily the case, and then also just for the domestic chores and work, and the unequal distribution of that. I mean, to run a 350 or 450 kilometer race takes a huge amount of time, but to train for that takes that amount of time times multiple times. I think it's sort of easy to separate sometimes the running from all the rest of the life and its inequities, and how that they actually can sort of interplay. We've talked a little bit about racing, and things like race deferrals, which I know has been a hot topic. If if I was a hypothetical race director, what would be sort of the action items that experienced women athletes who've been through really great races and less well organized ones, or ones with other issues? What would be on your sort of on your must have list for an excellent run race that sort of contemplates the needs of all participants?
What I would love to see, and I think there may be some races that are doing it now, but any race that has a lottery, commit to filling a certain percentage with women before you then put everybody else back into the lottery. Like a lot of these big races have maybe 10 to 15% women. Sometimes it's 8% women. On these really big races that people have had to qualify to get into, commit to 20%. Commit to 15%. Just women deserve to have the sport invested in with the same intensity that men, so start with getting more women into your races. I think it's also really important, and actually a race director discussed this with me, which made me realize that it was important, is how a race is marketed. Don't necessarily use words that are going to be very masculine and kind of extreme. Sure, you need to be realistic about what a race involves, but if a woman reads that a race is, going to be really, really difficult or really, really technical, and it's, marketed in this space that's really masculine, kind of described really as a masculine direction, they're much less likely to think that they're going to be able to do it when they are equally as capable as the men on the start line. So even just thinking about wording of how you promote your race to, we saw recently, right, providing sanitary product at your aid stations in case a woman has, it happens mid-race where you're like, oh my God, I've got my period. What am I going to do? This wasn't meant to happen now. Marking where your toilets are at your aid stations, making sure that there are adequate toilet facilities for women, because we are not able to, it's not as easy for us. The list is kind of endless, really.
I'm going to compliment what you said there, and also bring in some more stats that I've prepared. But on the first part about quotas, I absolutely agree. Quotas seem to be a controversial thing, and I honestly, they really don't need to be. It's just recognizing, one, that, for a woman to get to the start line, because of all of the reasons I have said, it represents actually a much higher level of effort. So let's make the space to actually to recognize that, and also recognizing that representation matters, and it makes a difference. When we talk about quotas, yes, 15, 20% would be great, but I wanted to point out the high lonesome 100, which is the only Western States and Hard Rock qualifier that guarantees a 50-50 split. And I really want to give a huge shout out to them on that, because I think that is setting the mark. We're actually asking for I think too low. And I did this on the last podcast I was on, when I said, yeah, it'd be great if we could have 15, 20%, but I'm going to push you, Sophie, as well, so that we can both ask for, why shouldn't it be 50-50?
I know.
Why not?
I know.
Why not?
I know. Do you know why? Because every time I say that, as you get pushback. Because for some reason, we don't deserve as many people on the start line as the men.
Exactly. And what I will say about the representation, I think it's positive because it has a ripple effect. So when you were talking about, the importance of language and how these races are marketed, this is where it was quite interesting as well from this book I read. I pulled out some evidence for this. For example, when you have language, when you have job advertisements that use the word he, or they use male masculine language in the job advertisement, women are less likely to apply. And if they apply and get the job, they're less likely to perform well. And that's because that job, that space has been represented as male. So if we're doing the same thing in our races, it actually might mean that we get less women entering and get less women thinking that they can do well if they do get into that race. And, it's important in English, but even more important in other languages. And I think that that's critical because this is ITRA. If you think about French, and there's masculine and feminine. When you look on a lot of French race websites and they talk about the runner, they're using the male form of the runner. It's le coureur. It's not la coureuse, which I also understand might have a negative slang meaning of it as well. But we're not representing the race in a way that I think could be as inclusive as possible. And then on the sanitary products, absolutely. Even if it doesn't impact, thousands and thousands of runners, I think it might. It's also another sign. It's a symbolic way of telling women that, like, hey, this is a space for you. We are considering your needs as well. When I ran Tour de Glacier, the 450K, I had my period for the whole week. I mean, it was just horrendous. And trying to, change tampons when you're out in the middle of nowhere and then carry a supply of tampons with you for a week, it's not a pleasant thing. So, considering what Sophie said about the toilets, women have to go to the bathroom more than men. Women get UTIs, urinary tract infections, 8 times. We are 8 times more likely to get urinary tract infections than men. And, the ability to use toilets and to have facility, that's not always possible in a lot of the races we run. Okay, I recognize this, but it's just making it where we can make positive changes, we should. And race directors have a responsibility to do that.
Anything else in terms of, like, you guys are both at the very competitive sort of point of the field, in terms of things like prize money, or even talking about men's and women's races as separate races, whereas both of you guys have been in the top 10 or on the podium of the overalls in races. What are your thoughts on that in terms of sort of the dynamics at the competitive end?
Really, so this wasn't a race that I was in, but one of my friends, she was on the podium, and I'm pretty sure I've got this right. The men got a pair of running shoes and the woman got manicure sets. It's just unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, we are seeing a lot more equality now. Although it is, I guess a publicity, so I'm all for this. When Trans Gran Canaria took their top women and they put them on the start line at the front, in front of all the men, I'm there for that. I'm there for, like, women showcased. We need more coverage. Like, I hate to say that, like, even the UTMB last year, we're watching Killian run up a hill at night in the dark when this women's CCC winner is coming into, like, who cares about Killian running up a hill? Like, sure, he's amazing and I want to see him finish and I want to see him run, but you have got your women's winner coming in for a 100-kilometer race and you are not showing that. There's a lot of just that kind of coverage. There's a lot of inequality within that. And honestly, I know that the men, generally it's not the men at the front of the race that are the people that we are battling with. But why aren't they speaking up for us too, right? Like, why are they not going, hang on, actually, that's not right that I'm getting a pair of running shoes and she's getting a manicure set. It's not right that I'm getting more prize money. It's not right that I'm getting a better, sponsorship deal. Or why is it that it's always just like, can you guys listen to us? And then, I don't know for you, Steph, but it's always this kind of like tricky balance of like not coming across as someone who doesn't want, it's not that I don't want these things for the men, but I also want them for the woman. I don't want it to be
of course. But at the same time, there are some things when it comes to the race lotteries, that's where the pushback is, because in order for more women to get in, men have to have less space, and that's something that I think we need to do more work on. With the prize thing, I remember one race in Italy where it was in the fall, but we were literally given like gourds, like pumpkins, and the women got tiny ones and the men got big ones, and it was just a sign that like men were better. Um, on the media coverage, I think that's a really important aspect, because it subliminally, influences how we see performance and what kind of attention we're giving, and it impacts the sponsorship side. And I can't think of a more telling example that just happened. I think it was today or yesterday, with the BBC and the bias that plays into it. The BBC covered the spine race. This incredibly horrific. I don't know why people do this race. It's incredibly horrific across the UK in January. I mean, my God. um, and they announced Damien as having broken the course record. But of course, he had broken the male course record. The overall course record was Jasmine Paris. It was a woman. They didn't even consider the fact or look it up to make sure that they were giving accurate information. And if I were her, I would just, to not be recognized for that is absolutely incredible. And so when we come to there's a responsibility on the media side, but then when we come to the sponsorship side, this is where it gets really tricky. And I've experienced this, myself. I'm on the North Face Explorer team. They treat me extremely well. But in talking with other athletes, other female athletes with a variety of different sponsorship deals, with a variety of different sports brands, a lot of athletes have no non-disclosure clauses in their contracts, so that they can't speak openly with others about what they're receiving. And I have seen directly, women getting less because they're not asking for more, because they're in more vulnerable positions and they don't feel like they're at a good negotiating position. I'm not embarrassed to say that, the only reason why I've been able to get more money out of these things is because of conversations with my partner, which is just ridiculous. He often tells me, think like a man, which is a bit sexist in and of itself, but but it's the right, it's I understand where that sentiment comes from, because we're socialized to operate a certain way in these kinds of negotiations. And if sports brands could remove all of these clauses about not being able to discuss contracts, if athletes were able to discuss with one another, if we were be able to form some kind of alliances where women could know what's in all of the male contracts, women could talk with other women and talk with other men so that they could negotiate better, then that's putting power back to the athlete. But it has to come from the sports brands themselves, and I would really love to see, well, particularly the North Face, take a lead on this. But and any of the other brands, I would really love to see them come out and be public with what they with what the statistics are. Tell us what the average of your female contracts are, and tell us what the average of your male contracts are, and what the spread is. You don't have to tell us individual athletes, but be more transparent about it. And then that will allow us as consumers and as athletes to make better decisions about where we want to put our support.
I'd love to even see disclosure about even the total numbers of athletes that are sponsored, and making sure that breakdown is sensible. But no, I mean, these are issues that happen across all aspects of life. It shouldn't surprise us that they pop up in the running community as well. In terms of training as a runner, Sophie, you're a coach. What do you see different in terms of your female athletes, and how is that sort of training process and coach athlete dynamic different with female athletes, if at all?
I find it really interesting. Like when the male athletes that I train, often they will come up, we'll come up with these great big racing plans for the year or adventures or things like that. And, it is very much a side comment that they will speak to their other partner to see if they're okay. Whereas the woman that I coach, it is very much well, let me see what my husband's doing, or let me see what my partner's doing. I just need to, all the kids, I can't because it's the school holidays, or, all of this stuff comes into it for the woman. And for the men often, and I apologize to any of my male athletes who are listening to this, it is a little bit of a like, well, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm sure I can make that work. Also things like, a lot of that safety stuff of trying to find ways for my female athletes to train, particularly during the winter, or if they are in, out in little villages, if they don't necessarily feel comfortable, trying to come up with, a variety of different sort of things that they can do in a much smaller varied. But, the men often I'll be like, great, well, let's go do like a 3-day fast. And the woman, I spend a lot more time kind of trying to build up their self-belief. And it is so rewarding for me when I get that, when a woman comes, they're like, I'm going to do this big, scary thing that honestly, Sophie, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it. And I'm like, of course you can. There is absolutely no reason that you cannot do this. And then, they go, they do it, and they come back and they're just like, I can't believe that I can now do these things. I can fast pack by myself for 3 days. I can, go and run this big race that's scary, and I'm not sure I'm going to make the cutoffs and all of that sort of stuff. There is a lot less of that having to build belief for the men. Often it has to be a little bit more of the like, okay, cool, yeah, I know that you've like just run your first 5K and now you want to go on TMB.
Let's take down some belief.
It's like, cool, you've run a really flat like 50K and you want to go and do an extreme sky race. I'm like, okay, cool, so maybe we'll get some climbing experience in there first.
That's brilliant.
It certainly is it's very different. But it's so satisfying coaching women. I mean, I love coaching men too. I really do. But just, when you have women who are not sure of themselves or aren't sure that they, some of my kind of greatest moments as a coach are, someone doing, one of my athletes, she wanted to start running because her husband was doing ultras, and last year she did the Centurion Grand Slam, and for her that was a huge achievement, and it's a huge achievement, 50 milers in a year, and like dealing with that, going through menopause and all of that sort of stuff, and it was huge. And to be a part of someone's journey like that, and to help instill that belief that they are so capable and there are really big things in their future, it's really cool.
I haven't even considered that the menopause part is still on the horizon. I mean, I have considered it, but not how it affects running. Oh God.
And you think it's bad for research, just for women generally, right? And then you bring in menopause, and it's like, I mean, research probably is, men are up here and women are maybe down here, and their menopause is like that. I was thinking the other day, one of my athletes sent me through a study about, whether or not trail running and road running can be kind of like equated, and whether the speeds are the same and thing. And the headline was, trail runners or blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I read through the study and it was on 17 men.
Yeah.
So, like, why is it trail runners? Because it's not trail runners, it's male trail runners. Maybe we need to start doing that, because there is just so little research. I mean, it's getting better, but there is so little research on women in those sorts of spaces, even in medicine, right? Like, there was like...
And the lack of research is, I mean, it has really negative effects. And again, I'm going to talk about when I was briefly pregnant and the miscarriage. You know, when I had the miscarriage, there was a lot of not a lot, but there was some kind of messaging coming back to me that, oh, it was because I was an ultra runner. It was because, you know, I got pregnant right before Hard Rock. It was because of my lifestyle. And, you know, if I want to get pregnant again, I should stop. And, you know, there is absolutely no research to back that up. It's just part of this narrative and kind of the control of women's bodies. But you know, it would be great if we could have research to show how we can bounce back, or you know, what things we should do differently if we're training while we're pregnant or recovering from pregnancy. How does this affect, you know, higher level athletes? So, or just athletes in general who are women. You know, we don't have any kind of science around this, and then it feeds into this narrative that, you know, we need to take the most conservative approach. We need to do less, and that really isn't going to help us. I remember there was one, this isn't related to pregnancy or anything like that, but just talking about the studies, back in, I think, 2009, I got a pelvic stress fracture, and this is after I'd run a series of races and was doing quite well. And I was convinced it was because, you know, of my ultra running and something in the way that I was training. And I was going to, you know, a top sports medicine doctor at Columbia University, and he didn't believe me. He was trying to first didn't believe that it was a pelvic stress fracture, and I was in an immense amount of pain, and didn't believe I know it's bad to self-diagnose, but didn't believe my own reasoning about it. And I went out and did my own research, and I found one study that was about female Army recruits who were carrying these big heavy packs, and they were training with this extra load. And because, you know, the specifics about being a woman, how we're structured, our hips, you know, are wider versus men, and you know, the load that we carry affects us differently. They had it was a study specifically on everyone getting the same pelvic stress fracture. And I had been training with a pack for a multi-day race, and I was like, this is me, you know. And I was lucky that I found one study, but you know, it's this obscure study in the middle of nowhere, and that would have helped me get diagnosed earlier. That would have helped me get better treatment, would have helped me you know, change my training. This is the case across the board.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, that idea that sort of our foundational knowledge for so many things, including sports science and running performance, that's often built on, you know, maybe single sex or not representative of our current running community. And I do wonder sort of where that where you find things coming out of that sort of accepted principles that might not actually apply. I wonder for either of you, when you're sort of looking for training plans or assigning training plans to your athletes, do you make technical modifications? Do you have a different approach in terms of just even the nuts and bolts of sort of what workouts are necessary, rest periods, things like that?
That's what I actually want to ask Sophie, just to jump in on that, because Sophie, I know you've been looking into a lot more how women's cycles affect, you know, how they're able to train. I mean, I would just love to hear more about that.
So there's still not a huge amount of science in the area, because it's because we're difficult to study, because we have a period, and because we have these hormonal fluctuations, and also because every woman is different. So kind of what I've read and what I've kind of seen is that, you know, some women don't have any problems really training through their cycle. Some women, their cycle puts them in bed for a couple of days, you know, each month. I think so. There's a really great podcast, the Female Athlete Podcast. So they're doing a lot of really good stuff, and it's a really good place to just learn, for women to learn more about their cycle. Like, I don't know about you, Steph, but like when I started looking into this and reading more about it and listening to people talk about it, I suddenly realized that what I learned about my cycle, my body, my period, I had no idea. what was going on. Like I knew I got my period once a month, and it was kind of annoying, and that. But then to actually learn about your hormonal fluctuations and what that can mean for your possibility of getting injured at different times during the month,
Yeah.
of whether or not you've got more strength, whether you've got higher testosterone levels, like all of that sort of stuff. To start to learn more about that, I was just like, I got taught nothing at school about this, and we should be teaching young girls this stuff, like what is really happening to their bodies, because it's all well and good for someone of my age, but when you've got girls at school training and you have a coach who does not understand what a period means, and there are still coaches out there who think it is perfectly okay for women to not get periods, and it's just horrifying, like I'm seeing often, you see often the backlash of that in adults. Women who have multiple stress fractures, women who have, not had their period for 3-4 years and being told that that was okay, or being put on the pill to have a period that's not a real period. I used to think my period was this really annoying thing, and I had the implant as contraception. It was great because I never got it. And then I realized that it is the power for us, right? Like it is one way, and it is not necessarily entirely indicative of it, but it is one way of us to keep a track of our body's health. Like if you are not getting a period, or if your period is disrupted, or if like there is something going on there, that means that your body doesn't necessarily have enough energy to take you through your normal hormonal fluctuations. So I think training around your period, it's a very, very personal thing. I think the best thing that women can do is to track it and to really pay attention to exactly how they're feeling each month. Is it regular? Do you feel like I get really grumpy just before I ovulate? And like just things like that, like, right, okay, so I know that these are what I'm going to go through. Do I feel weaker in that week before? You know, as an athlete myself, to know that like your hormones go back to a more balanced state when you actually start bleeding. To know that as an athlete, because I had a year where I raced every single race with my period. It was unbelievable. I was just like, what is this? I mean, maybe it was racing too much, but for me to know that if I stood on that start line and I have my period, to go, okay, at least my hormones are normal now. Sure, I might have to deal with tampons and, like all of that sort of stuff, but at least I know that my hormones are regulated now and they're back to normal. I get a little bit clumsy in the week before I get my period. It's not exactly what you want to have out running on technical trail. And it's just things like that. It's just getting to know yourself, your body, and what that means as far as your own training.
Anything to add to that, Steph?
I mean, I think I've gotten much better at tracking how my cycle affects me, but not so much in terms of how it's affecting my training. I mean, you say, Sophie, that you get, really grumpy before you ovulate. I get quite a high sex drive. So, at least I know that, but I don't know how that affects me out on the trails. But it's, I think, the only thing I can add on this, I really just wanted to hear what, Sophie's insights. I think it's good that we're talking about it more, just as an additional element for us to think about, more questions for us to have, and so that we can start to notice what patterns we might have. Hopefully we'll start to get more research in this area as well. But I think for ourselves, if we can at least try to recognize that it does impact how we, our energy levels and how we operate on and off the trails. I think that would help. There's actually a film coming out by the North Face on periods later this year that I think will be really interesting to look at and to see that out there more in the public space.
Yeah,
it's
very, very interesting.
It's nuts that 50% of the world's population goes through this. And like for so long, it's been this taboo subject that we don't talk about. Just, I don't know. I think the more that we can air these subjects, the better.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be an unexplored mystery, but I've learned a lot just listening to both of you. We're getting close to the hour mark, but one last question for me is, as just a member of the running community, not a race director, just someone who's out there running. What could I do to sort of be more thoughtful to the women who are participating, or even for other women in terms of what they can do to help support their other runners?
Yeah, it's a hard one because it's a question that I think we constantly get asked, which is good. What more can we do? And we've talked about the responsibilities of sports brands. We've talked about responsibilities of race directors. We've talked about various different governing bodies. But when it comes down to the individual, I think we definitely need more men, as Sophie was saying earlier, pushing for these same things that we're pushing for. It really helps to have men behind these kinds of initiatives, to add to the voices that some of us are raising, and to push back on the people who are producing some of the backlash. If we don't have members of the community who are in the dominant class, let's call it, helping to create more space, then we're not going to get very far. And some things don't require men to give up their power or their privileged position, like having similar podium spots and prizes. Those things are easy. But quotas in races are more controversial because specifically of that element of men recognizing that, they need to give up some of their privileged position in the sport, recognizing first that they have a privileged position in the sport, and be willing to give some of that up because it's going to make the sport better overall. I think we could really use more support on that. And then, on an individual, very basic level, stop the mansplaining on the trails, as Sophie was saying.
Please.
You think you're being helpful? We don't need to be told, how we're doing, if we're going too fast, tips for getting up the mountain. If you're not going to give that to a guy, don't give it to us, because we're probably just going to pass you anyway. We're good. Like we know what we're doing. So like,
get out of Sophie's way.
Yeah,
just let us pass.
Get out of the way. I think as well, with regards to that whole kind of safety issue, being aware that you are, and you may not intend this in any way, but as a woman, unfortunately, when you're out running at night and there are, you're in an environment that you feel unsafe, and there are men running near you or running behind you or whatever, just be aware that is potentially making a woman feel a little bit uneasy. Also, if you're going to pass someone, can you just pass them and run faster? Like, don't pass and then run and slow them down. It's really annoying. Like, burn a match. Keep going. Get out of the way.
It's a good rule for all. For all.
I have to say, I've got one tiny little anecdote to maybe end on. When you were talking about that, this term getting chicked. For one road race that I did, I hate road races, but in order to get through it, I actually dressed as Angry Bird. So I physically chicked people when I ran past them, and the expressions on their faces when these guys were taking it very seriously, and I ran by them with this huge Angry Bird costume. It just made me feel a lot better about the whole situation. So highly recommend it.
You might have inflicted some long-term psychological damage there.
I'm fine with it.
No, that's fantastic. We should wrap up. Before we do, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to share any sort of upcoming plans, projects that you have, any social media or any other Anything else that you wanted to give a shout out to? Sophie?
You know what? I'm not really sure what I've got planned this year. I've got lots of things in the pipeline. Kind of, yeah, we'll see. Maybe make my way back to the Tour de Géant. But just having a year, yeah, just again, I got unfinished business. That one, I definitely know I can do better. But I've got just.
I will say you
whole
made the
lineup.
podium before you made the podium. So okay, let's get that out there.
Yeah, but when there's like a bunch of stuff I did wrong, so I'd like to do it again and do a bunch of other stuff wrong probably that time. But yeah, no, just kind of out there in the mountains trying to have some fun this year and do a whole bunch of different things.
Okay. And are you working on athletes, or people want to find you on?
So I'm
how
on
can they get you?
Instagram, Sophie Grant, and then I coach for Centurion Running, which is a race organisation in the UK, and yeah, on Facebook too, the same handle. No longer on Twitter. Got off that space when everything started to go very much downhill. It's like, I'm out. Exited that.
It's very, very understandable. And Steph, what do you have going on?
So I actually got another space in Hard Rock, which I feel very fortunate. 2 years in a row the chances of getting that are pretty slim, which puts me in a strange place because as I was encouraging others to enter, I'd publicly said that I had no intention of running the race this year because I wanted to get pregnant again, and then I got a spot. So Hard Rock does have a pregnancy deferral policy, so let's see what happens. The one issue with the deferral policy, while they do allow you to enter either the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, I mean, not all of those years, defer by 1, 2, or 3 years, you have to requalify again. So that's a factor that I think adds another layer of complication. But let's see. For the moment, I'm in Hard Rock, and we'll see what other adventures I can pull in, either around the Middle East or back where my permanent home and love is in Chamonix. And then people can find me on Instagram. I've made a terrible error on Instagram because I've been meaning to change my name because the name is The Ultra Runner Girl, which I picked in my 20s, and it just does not match with my feminist stance and the fact that I'm 40 now. But now that I'm verified, I can't change my name ever, so I'm going to have this until I'm 65. So you can find me at the very mature The Ultra Runner Girl.
All right. Well, thanks so much to both of you for joining. This was really informative for me, and I hope our listeners and viewers find it helpful and interesting as well. So wishing you great luck for both of you in 2023. And for everyone, thanks for joining us today. You can find the Trail Talks podcast on YouTube. And you can find ITRA on the web as well as on all the social medias. So I'm Jeff Campbell. A pleasure to host today, and happy running to everyone. Take care.